I'm trying to adjust my framing of success to being um, just very happy every single day when I wake up.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Lookup Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Weinstein, and as always, I want to kick off this episode with a huge thank you. Thank you to all of you who have been listening from the beginning. Thank you to all of you who are tuning in for the first time. Thank you to my guests, both past guests and those of you that I've already agreed to interview in the future. And thank you to those of you who have contributed to this community through my Patreon account, which I have a link to in the show notes. We are in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. It's April 19th, 2020, as I'm recording this introduction. The conversation that I had with today's guest was recorded in late February, before it was clear just how bad the COVID situation would get, although there was some semblance of fear at that time, which we mentioned in the episode. My guest today is Jeff Morris Jr. Jeff is the founder of Chapter One Ventures, which is an early stage venture fund based in Los Angeles. Prior to starting Chapter One, Jeff was formerly the VP of Product and Revenue at Tinder. While at Tinder, he led the revenue team to the #1 grossing app in the App Store and directed one of the top grossing products in mobile history. He continues to be an active investor through Chapter One, investing in companies like Lyft, Superhuman, Roman, Branch Metrics, and most recently Lambda School, where he actually nearly joined to lead the product team. And Jeff and I speak about his decision after 6 months to drop his role at Lambda School and to pursue his passion of becoming a full-time venture investor. And although Jeff was formerly the VP of product at Tinder and Lambda School, and currently an early stage investor, we don't focus much on his experience building product or his investment framework. But instead, as I like to do on this show, we really hone in on the human element of starting a company and of being an investor or just an individual living in the modern world. Jeff's philosophy is to share himself openly with the public, and he lacks a concern about stigma, which I think is great. And so we are able to dive deep on some really challenging issues. He shares the origins of the Tinder story and the impact that online dating has had on our relationships and mental health. And as I said, he's an open book. So we discuss his personal relationship with technology, his definition of work-life balance, his own experience with therapy, both as an individual and relationship therapy with his wife. We also identify and try to hone in on a definition of luck and success. What does it mean to be successful? How does it feel to have others tell you that you're successful when you're still comparing yourself to peers who you believe to be more so? And of course, we chat about why he left Lambda School and really following your passion rather than resting investing, which you'll learn more about in this episode. I think this episode will be most helpful to those of you who are on an entrepreneurial path or to those of you who are currently making a decision about your next career move. One of the negative effects of this coronavirus situation has been the 20 million plus Americans who are now out of jobs. And so if you're in that situation, I hope that this episode helps you to figure out what it is that you're going to do next. My thoughts and prayers are with everyone who is sick and healing, who has lost a loved one, or who is economically struggling. These are not easy times. And I hope that we as a society come out of it stronger and better. So once again, thank you for tuning in. Without further interruption from me, I bring you Jeff Morris Jr. So Jeff, thanks for coming on the Lookup Podcast. I really appreciate you joining.
Awesome. I'm so happy to be here and big fan of what you're building with the podcast. And yeah, long time coming. So happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been trying to make this happen for a few months now, and I'm glad that we did. I heard you on Stuart Alsop's Crazy Wisdom podcast, as I mentioned, and Stuart's awesome. And I really liked some of the subjects that you guys dove into, and I'm hoping to expand on some of those But I guess, there's so many places I want to go. I mean, you guys didn't really talk about your work at Tinder that much. And part of, part of the reason for starting this show was to identify and evaluate the impact that technology is having on our relationships, on our mental health, on our politics and society at large. And the show's kind of expanded to include really just philosophy and consciousness and startups and, as many podcasts do, it starts to broaden out. But I just kind of wanted to start with Tinder because you were there for a number of years. You ran product and revenue, and you built some things there. So how do you feel your work at Tinder, and specifically your work on Tinder Gold, has affected relationships in the 21st century?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple places to start. One, I think just the origins of Tinder. Sean Rad, who's the CEO, he talks about this a lot. He started Tinder because he's actually a pretty shy person. When he was single and going out to bars or clubs, he wasn't the type of person who could just walk up to any girl at the restaurant and just start talking to them. And so I think for a lot of people, even myself, I'm not an introvert, but when I was dating, Tinder opened up a whole new world to me, just in terms of giving me access to just a broader group of people who I would never actually have access to or meet. And I hear this all the time. It's like I would have never met this type of person without online dating. And I think the best book on this was actually Aziz Ansari wrote a book called Modern Love, and he was talking a lot about how in the 1930s or a long time ago in a place like New York City, the majority of marriages actually happened from within a 3-block radius. And so the world was just a lot smaller back then. And so you didn't have the same level of diversity that we now have with things like online dating. And now, I talk to friends who meet people just all around the world. And so in terms of finding the right person, you're no longer limited to a 3-block radius, which I think is really exciting. And then just on a cultural level, I think it's created a lot more optionality in terms of people are now making their own decisions about when they want to get married. And there's a lot more, I feel like, openness to different relationship types, whether it's waiting longer to get married or just having a different belief system about who you want to marry. The gay community loves Tinder as an example, because you think about small cities, and I hear this a lot from people in the Midwest. I think a lot of communities don't have a gay bar that you can go to and actually meet someone who has your same sexual preferences, which we take for granted living in Los Angeles. I live in West Hollywood, which is one of the most open-minded places in the world, but a lot of people don't have that same access within their communities. So for all the all the articles about how online dating is killing monogamy or whatever the headlines might be, and we see those headlines. There's a whole other world that's just so grateful for products like Tinder that exist.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I love that perspective. I have to admit, coming into this, I had a bit of a bias, and I still do. And so my bias is that I believe that, dating apps have created a little bit of perverse incentives in that there's always the possibility of infinite choice, and it's right there in front of you. And so, in gamifying human connection as well, so that people are coming back to the application and swiping, it kind of taps into that human desire to strive for something better or something different. And I guess the question is, do you find that people are no longer settling? Is the infinite optionality that apps like Tinder offer actually better for mental health and happiness. And again, I come in this just open, just fully, admitting my own bias here. Like I want to dig into these issues, and I know that, it's good that you have a positive perspective as well. And there's always both, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would say the infinite optionality kind of zeitgeist of the moment applies to many things outside of dating. If you look also at just like modern employment and our views towards careers at this point, like the world has changed where people are always looking for the next best thing in every part of your life. And I think as you mentioned, like the possible downside of online dating is that you are always looking for something else, and you're always trying to kind of upgrade your partner. And it's kind of it. Like if you watch Black Mirror, there was a great dating episode where it touched on many of these topics, which is at some point like the algorithm becomes overly optimized, and your like dating becomes too formulaic, and it almost becomes a computer program in itself.
Yeah, I remember that episode. They kept going back to the same dinner, right? It was like the same couple and over and over and over again, just these infinite string of them continuing to date.
Yeah, and the big part of that episode was when you match with somebody somewhere towards the beginning of your relationship, you actually are told how long you're going to stay together, which it creates a lot of sadness and awkwardness for people. And there's one couple who really does want to stay together, but they realize the computer algorithm actually doesn't want them to be together.
This is a good segue. Like what does Tinder's algorithm optimize for, and other dating apps? Do they optimize for the best connection, or do they optimize for people coming back?
I mean, our job and how we create happy customers was always to optimize for the best connections. So there's a lot of people who would ask me like, do you make Tinder recommendations? And by the way, I did not work on the recommendations product, so yeah. I'm saying you as in the company. Do you make recommendations just good enough so people stay interested in the product, but don't leave? Meaning it's not the best possible matches. And I can tell you from being on the inside for a long time, we are a lot of what the team is trying to do is create the best possible matches, but create matches as soon as possible. Because the fact is, if you're matching with people on Tinder and you're having conversations, like those are the product loops that keep people engaged with the platform. And especially on the conversations piece, if people are having conversations, they're coming back to Tinder often, and that for a product designer is very very favorable to kind of what you're trying to accomplish. So there's never I don't think we have I don't want to say that we're smart enough, but we don't have enough data to like create an algorithm that gives you matches that are just good enough so you go on like
a couple of dates and then you come back. Will there ever, do you believe there'll be an algorithm that could do that?
I think it could over time. A lot of where our data did not capture what happened was after the match. So once you decide to go on a date with somebody,
then you move to text message or something like that. And
there are some products, and I know it was a conversation that ask you how your date went and almost have like an Uber style rating system for your dates. And for us, like Tinder is supposed to be, and again, I speak kind of in the past tense because I've been at Tinder for 6 months or 7 months. But Tinder was supposed to be very fun and light, and it wasn't supposed to be a heavy dating product. And so we always thought like the more we reminded you that Tinder was a dating product, the less the less cool it would be. So we purposely tried to, and this was why at the time, and I think maybe there's things happening currently that like we never want to do things like adding a bunch of questions at the beginning of the sign-up experience, because we really, the beauty of Tinder was you created an account with Facebook and you were dating, or you were swiping on people, I should say, within 15 seconds. And all the previous products had very long kind of like, and you've seen this with products like,
like OkCupid or something like that. You had to fill in this crazy form and you lose customers probably right up front.
You lose customers. And at the time, like the market size for dating was a lot smaller because a lot of people didn't identify with being an online dater. And suddenly you created an application that felt more like a social app, a traditional social app that didn't have all of the baggage that came with the online dating category. And so I think you're seeing this a lot just in other social products. You know, every internet product, you've heard the quote, probably like eventually becomes a dating app in some way. Like,
yeah.
And so even like my brother's, he's 30 years old now, and I have a brother in college, and they use all sorts of apps for dating that aren't dating apps. You know, Instagram
seems to have really moved in that direction.
Yeah, and Instagram's never said we're a dating app. It just so happens that when you have people creating content and you have
about their glamorous lifestyle,
and then you add on the ability to direct message that person, and you add a lot of location features, you know, it becomes a dating app pretty quickly. So, you know, I think there are I'm very aware of the mental health arguments towards, and really it applies to everything on your phone, not just dating apps. And I've dug very deeply into this, and I think there does need to be a larger conversation around mental health in regards to digital addiction. But I wouldn't limit that conversation to dating. I would say across the board, there's an epidemic in the world right now, which is people are addicted to their phones, and you notice it when you're driving in your car on the freeway. You see people on their phones, and
I mean, it's crazy in LA. Has anyone done a study on the percentage of people that are using their phones while driving? It seems like it's closer to 100% than zero, honestly.
Pretty wild. Occasionally I'll just like count if I'm like driving on Wilshire and we keep these stoplights, because it's not only when I think people avoid being on their phones when the car is moving, but right when you're at a stoplight, everyone just grabs their phone and it becomes a minute of phone usage that and you see this all the time in real life. You see it when people are walking down the street, and I don't know the right solution. I do know I've tried to invest in digital addiction products that try and break digital addiction, and it seems like selling products to people who like the first step of solving, I think, is getting people to admit that they have an addiction, which is, and I just don't think there's a lot of self-awareness that we have this problem on an individual level. Even when Apple sends you the weekly summary that says you've been on your phone
for 11 hours a day.
Some weeks I'm on my phone for 5 hours, 6 hours a day, which is, pretty scary. But when you get those messages, you kind of just move on with your life. And I've actually looked at there are digital addiction camps and centers. One of them's in Washington, and I've thought about, like, what if you just opened a bunch of digital addiction clinics throughout the city? But I don't think that people would want to even participate, because I don't think people realize the extent of their problem, really.
Yeah, and that's definitely something I wanted to talk to you about. Your deep dive on kind of mental health and digital wellness. On Stuart's podcast, you mentioned you spent 6 months doing that. I would also like to know just kind of, well, one, did you meet your wife on Tinder?
I did not. We met actually through friends at a will.i.am concert in 2010, and then we were friends for 5 or 6 years, and um, that gave me a little bit of time to explore single life, and I was on Tinder and OkCupid and
Mhm.
Hinge and everything else. But yeah, really like we ended up just both being in the same wedding, and we shared a couple hundred mutual friends, and so it made like everybody was cheering for us to work and be a couple, and we did.
The old fashioned way.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. It's good to have both.
Yeah, my sister met her husband on JDate, which was, and this happened a long time ago.
Hmm.
And at the time, I don't think they even told people that they met on JDate because there was like,
A stigma about having met online.
yeah, now you see like Tinder weddings and Tinder proposals where we had people come to our office to propose to people they met on Tinder, and like nothing shocks anybody anymore in the world, and people are just really open about every part of their lives, and there's no stigma with online dating. I think 40% of relationships in the US start online now. And that number just keeps going up every single year.
Yeah, one thing I would like, one positive argument that I heard in favor of online dating and that resonated with me was similar to kind of the founder of Tinder. Most people go to watering holes or historically went to watering holes to meet partners. And it just seems like I think there was a scene in I Love You, Ma'am, which was like if you don't want to meet your wife at a club or something like that. And so, at least the dating apps offer an opportunity to go do something together that you both find interesting, like go on a hike. One of the reasons I love Los Angeles, or, go to a book opening or a concert or whatever it might be. But and I agree that the addictive nature of technology applies to platforms and apps beyond just dating apps. And I've had a number of guests on the show. So I had Nir Eyal, who recently wrote the book Indistractable, previously wrote Hooked, which was basically how to get people hooked on technology. Did you read that book?
I did, and I think it's a book that most product people have read. So
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about this last night. I don't know why, but it's hard when you work in an industry where your success is measured on things like daily active users and weekly active users, and I'm speaking just across the industry, or things like app opens.
Yeah, consumer tech.
Consumer tech, like when you're in those walls building the product, and that's your scoreboard. That's at moments you lose empathy for the fact that these are real people on the other end that you're trying to design your product for, and designing your product in ways to get them hooked might not be what's best for their lives, or even for your application. Like I think there's ways probably to win and not get people addicted to your application.
How can we design, as a product minded person, how do you think that we can design technology that enhances the human condition and minimizes externalities such as, potential for addiction?
The devices that I think, and the applications that are, I think, doing the most exciting work in this area are things like the Apple Watch. And it's why so when I dug into mental health, I became really excited about biometric data, and all that, basically the fact that you have a doctor on your wrist at all times, and what conditions you can detect and diagnose through things like the Apple Watch. And the list is actually pretty deep. And so those are things like PTSD, depression, and insomnia. These are all things that either your watch or your AirPods can one day detect. I read a study about AirPods and voice detection, and there are patterns in your speech which you can use to identify PTSD. And so that's kind of like the happy, optimistic side of the world, which is there are products and platforms that are being built to help improve our mental wellness, kind of across the board. The downside is, I think, consumer social will continue to exist, and the reality is the metrics that people care about are very often related to getting you to open your phone as many times as possible. And so I don't know the perfect way to solve this. I do know that Apple in particular is doing interesting work on the platform level to create things like time limits on an application basis for consumption. So I think that's a pretty good starting point. I don't know that many people who have created those barriers for themselves.
Yeah.
And so again, this goes back to like, do people actually want to change their habits? And then on kind of the product design level, like I think a large number of the distractions are when applications try and insert themselves into your life at moments when you probably don't need that application to exist. So things like, and I tell my friends and family, like, turning off your push notifications is a great starting point, or only having push notifications that you absolutely need. And there's so many different products that I feel like, even thinking of Facebook and or LinkedIn, every time you open those products, you have a red dot, which makes you feel like you're behind on something and you need to open up your inbox, or you have notifications that have been waiting for you, and it creates this constant feeling that you're missing out. And so being able to turn off those notifications and frankly delete the apps that don't add value to your life. I know a lot of people have deleted Facebook from their phones, and they say they've never been happier. I wish I could do that. As a product designer, like, I feel the need to like really know what's going on, but I think there will be more studies and more data that shows reducing the amount of technology in your life is better. I question whether people really will pay attention or care, because people love their applications, and they love their phones, and even seeing kids, like the digital babysitter that is the iPad.
It's wild. I was with my sister and brother-in-law and my niece and nephew the other day, and like, my nephew and I rarely get to see each other. We went to a restaurant, and the phone went on, and he's engaged for an hour and a half, but he's also well behaved, right? And it's like, you take it away from him, and there's he gets pretty ornery. And I've seen this with other kids, and I don't have children, so I've talked about this on the show before, how it's challenging to try to imagine what it would be challenging for me to try to imagine what it would be like to have a child, with all of the temptation of just kind of putting them in front of the tech, and some of the content that's out there is like watching other kids unbox presents. And so, like, one of his first words was present. And it's super interesting to see how really habit forming the tech is. And it can be used for beneficial purposes like education as well. If you can integrate certain bells and whistles into educational content, and we see platforms like Masterclass, and you were just at Lambda School, where technology is being used for the benefit of enhancing people, at least intellectually. I guess continuing on the personal thread, though, I wanted to ask kind of how you manage your relationship to technology as someone that enjoys working in tech, investing in tech companies. You seem to be on Twitter often, and it's been and Twitter has been extremely beneficial in your life, from what I can tell. I think you found your first tech job on Twitter. So one, how do you manage your relationship to technology to enhance your life and your relationships? And then two, how has technology impacted your life? How have these social apps positively impacted your life?
Yeah. So I think starting with the management part, I'll be completely honest and just say like I think I'm probably addicted to my phone, and
Yeah.
it's not something I'm proud of. But if I'm just being like completely real, I think I probably have a bit of digital addiction, and so I've done things to try and help that. And one thing is I bought just like a box with a lock, and every time
Yeah.
I came home, I would lock my phone in this box, and I wouldn't open it unless I really needed to check something. That lasted like a month, right? I've tried a bunch of like blocker apps on my phone, which prevent me from um, doing or using certain applications throughout the day. And again, like those things just seem to last for a limited period of time. And I think this is why overcoming any addiction is probably so hard. It's just you have not to dramatize it, but you have relapses, and
Yeah.
so I don't think I'm uh, uh, someone who can sit here and say, here's how you manage your life, and it's something I'm dealing with. And I think everybody, if they really we're being honest, would say they're dealing with it too. And so in terms of the things that are or have been beneficial is, I've stayed in touch with people in my life who I went to grad school with or who I grew up with, and without technology, I just would never have them in my lives. And so I think for just maintaining my relationships, it's been amazing. As you mentioned, for my career, it's been amazing. I've done my two jobs from Twitter effectively. One was my first job. Another one was not so much a job, but when I joined Lambda schools because I had met the founder through Twitter, and
Mm.
that led to me doing my MBA thesis on the company and led to a job. And I can't tell you the number of people I've met on Twitter that I grab lunch with and are suddenly like actually real friends. And so for me, my social life, a lot of it has benefited from Twitter. Um, and then just I think the third part is the education that I get online is amazing. I'm definitely someone who goes down rabbit holes. I think you and I both went down the crypto rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
much of that was just being uh,
Are you still engaged in that space at all, or how are you feeling about the industry?
I'm still engaged on like I have 14 or 15 companies I've invested in that I'm still actively supporting. I haven't made The only crypto investment I did recently was a company called lolly.com.
Oh yeah, they're like the honey, but with Bitcoin rewards.
Yeah, it's a Chrome extension where you earn Bitcoin for your online purchases. But that's like a very I don't know if centralized is the right word, but it's not like a protocol that is promising to change the world.
Yeah.
And so I always looked, and I still have looked for mostly onboarding ramps that have really clear consumer benefits, and are less kind of less futuristic in terms of like I haven't invested in any like decentralized. I haven't done any governance. I've done a little DeFi, so I did compound finance. I did Blockfolio. So like these are like just like real applications that mostly help people make money. And so I think, yeah.
Yeah. Have you been on any of the crypto podcasts like with Tom Shaughnessy or David Nage or Jason Choi or any of those guys?
I haven't, and I'm not sure. Like, I don't know how they'd feel about what I'm saying. And yeah, I've always found I'm so happy that there's kind of like people who are crypto idealists in the world. I just don't happen to be one of them. I kind of think of it more like, how can we get people to use this in the
That's the
context of their daily lives?
Well, one of the biggest challenges for me working in that space, and I don't even know if any of my listeners know that I'm in that space, or there's probably little overlap between my world. I mean, I spent the last 3 years in crypto, right? And I came into it from the framework of having studied economics and seeing, what was happening at a macro level with governments printing money. And yesterday was a prime example of that. I mean, we're in the midst of this coronavirus scare, and the US Fed cut rates another 50 basis points. And it seems like all in a desire to continue market prices to be propped up at, seemingly artificially high prices. I think the stock market's trading at like a 30 times price to earnings multiple, or was before this latest scare. And so for me, I came at it from like, a complete monetary standpoint of Bitcoin as non-sovereign gold or non-sovereign digital currency, store of value, whatever you want to call it. And then I got so deep, sucked into the rabbit hole, as you said. And I'm kind of slowly coming out the other side, just a little bit fed up with the lack of product market fit, the lack of user adoption. I think it's just, we're so early. Even DeFi, which stands for decentralized finance, which is like a really big investable theme in the space right now. It seems every fund in that industry is currently investing in it. It's mostly by developers, for developers, kind of tinkerers. And it feels a lot like an Ouroboros, where it's, a lot of existing investment capital from crypto getting cycled back in. I want to pivot away from crypto though, because that's why I asked. There's so many crypto podcasts you can go on, and there's so many talking heads in that space. And that's one of the reasons why I'm just like, I just like the academic, back and forth without much delivery has just really frustrated me over time. I wanted to, there was a thread that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to pull at a little bit. One, I really appreciate you sharing openly about your own kind of challenges with using technology kind of in a way that maybe affects your personal life. But you mentioned on Stuart's show, you said that you get great joy out of the work that you do, and a lot of the work that you do is based on meeting people online and finding companies and whatnot. So I was curious what your take is on work-life balance. It's this kind of buzzword that's come up, and I personally don't know exactly how I feel about it, because I also love working. I get great satisfaction out of it. So what's your thought on this concept of work-life balance?
Yeah, it's something I struggle with a lot, because I think when you actually love what you do, it's always kind of in the back of your mind. And for me, like, it could be a Sunday morning brunch with my family, and in the back of my mind, maybe I am thinking about something at work, and that's just being human. And so I don't think there's this binary on-off switch where maybe as there was in the past, where you have your work life and your home life. They just all kind of blend together at this point for me. And it's especially hard because you see, a lot of the people who become the best of their profession are obsessed with their craft. And so even just thinking of Kobe Bryant and all of the tributes to him was, yes, he was a great family man after his career was over, but when he was in his career, he was obsessed with basketball. And so for me, like, I want to be one of the best investors in venture capital one day. And to do that involves a certain level of focus that doesn't always lend itself to, the perfect work-life balance. That said, I think one of the benefits of being married, at least for me, is that I do have somebody who keeps my life a little bit more balanced. So My wife, for me, is the one who really is the social person in our household, and she
Yeah.
makes sure that I'm not always working. But if I was single, I think maybe I would uh, be a little bit more um, just singular focus on work. I do think,
And that's interesting to me just to say, well, one, I'd be curious to know how that manifests in your relationship and how how you guys kind of cope with that. It's something that I struggle with in my relationship, kind of the context switch of turning off, especially, I haven't achieved the level of success that I would like to in my life, on that, in that bucket of my life. And I guess, you've already had so much success in your career with Tinder, and actually not first, second with Tinder. You know, what is the game for you at this point?
yeah, I mean, I think so. Like people tell me, or when people tell you you've been successful, like my benchmark for success, and I think it's just the world we live in. Especially, I grew up in the Bay Area, and you're around hyper successful people all day, and you're constantly comparing your success to their success. So you never feel like you're successful, which probably isn't healthy. But it's like the truth is like you're always feeling like you have something else to prove, and even after Tinder, like I even now, like I don't feel like I'm like hyper successful in my life, and so
So how do you define success for yourself? And is success all relative?
I think it is relative. I mean, for me, like I'm trying to adjust my framing of success to being um, just very happy every single day when I wake up. And so it was one of the reasons why I chose to focus on investing and leave Lambda school recently was just I found my happiness, my personal happiness was coming from building my own company and really being an entrepreneur in terms of my fun. And it wasn't I was going down this career path of trying to be what everybody else wanted me to be, which was a VP of product and a CPO and like the product person on Twitter. And I just realized like that's actually not what I want to do. And
When did you realize that, and how did it how did it come about?
it was a series of things, but part of it was in trying to kind of like climb up the corporate ladder as I was moving up the ladder and starting to meet people who were kind of at the top of the profession. I didn't see a lot of happiness within their lives, and so I also saw how unpredictable their lives were in terms of if you're a chief product officer at a consumer tech company um, and a product release doesn't go well, or there's a new CEO or whatever it might be, you have very little control over the
Mm.
outcome of your career, and a lot of times you simply get replaced. And I think you see this a lot with CMOs, any C-level executive. There's just a lot of instability,
A lot of churn, yeah.
a lot of churn, and I personally want to be in a position in my career, in my life, where I didn't have to deal with that because I felt like I was at a place where I could actually build my own thing. We live in a world where it's really easy to release products and start something. So if you have the financial ability to do so and you can do it, like why not?
Yeah, I definitely I wanted to touch on this a little bit more, and you know, you are very active on Twitter. I follow you. I follow some of your thinking. Um, you've been extremely bullish on Lambda School. As you said, you did your master's thesis on it. And for listeners, Lambda School is a unique education platform for individuals who want to become coders, engineers, essentially, to switch careers. And you apply and you don't pay any tuition, and you learn it. You learn computer science or engineering, I think. Is that accurate? And the only way Lambda School makes money is if they land you a job, and they get a percentage of whatever income you earn. It's called an income sharing agreement, or an ISA. And so this is a new paradigm for learning. You were super bullish on it. And how many months did you end up staying at Lambda?
I was there about a half a year. So I had worked in total with the company through my thesis for about a year. And I'm also an investor in the company. So, really still kind of a part of the org, but it was a quick, there's no shying away from the fact, like, it was a pretty quick.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk about, because I'm actually, I saw you getting some flack online about that, and you were, being not necessarily defensive, but in response saying there's nothing wrong with the company. This is just me realizing and focusing on what actually makes me happy, which is investing in finding companies. And I thought that was really, brave for a few reasons. And I would love to hear your thoughts on these. One is, there seems to be this tendency amongst people in the working world, and specifically in the Valley or tech startups, to finish out the year, to get a year at least, to get 2 years, whatever. And then that checks the box of, I was there long enough for it to matter, or my reputation. And I think there's a hesitancy for people to change their minds. And so I wanted to, you said it, you started realizing what made you happy, but how were you able to create the space for yourself to change your mind about something that is seemingly such a important, decision? And I imagine there's so much ego tied up in not changing your mind.
I mean, for me, I talked to a lot of people who I loved and trusted, and every single person I talked to thought it was a great idea for me. And beyond that, I also just kind of realized that I don't care about like what other people think in terms of what the right career decisions are for me, because the reality is most people are so caught up in their own lives and their own careers that maybe you leave and it surprises them for a tweet or a couple minutes of their life, but then they're on to the next thing. And for me to delay my life and what I want to do for 6 months to please people on Twitter or recruiters or whoever it might be just seemed like a waste of my time. And so, I think 6 months is a very long time in your career, especially in the world we live in now. And so to delay anything in your life to please other people, just to me doesn't seem like the best use of your time. A lot of people do hit the 1 year mark at tech companies because that's when you vest, and most vesting schedules require you to hit a year. For me, I thought it was unfair to the company to sit there for 6 months, just so I could hit that date when they could be building a team of people who were really passionate and dedicated to that given role. And so I thought it would have been pretty selfish of me to sit there and just that. And so, I think again, this goes back to like the beginning of the podcast, which is we live in a world that has a lot of optionality, and people can make career decisions faster than they could in the past. And this idea, and by the way, I've worked at companies. The past 2 companies I've worked at, one was for 4.5 years, and the other one was for over 3 years. So I don't advocate job hopping, but if you know that you want to be doing something else with your life, and you have the financial flexibility to do that, then why not make those hard decisions as quickly as possible? And why, I think you have to ask yourself, why do you care about what other people think about you? And if it's your ego, then the best thing you can do is acknowledge that your ego's really getting in the way of your personal happiness, and so you should be making decisions with your heart and not with your ego, and that's what I did.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of things at the end there. So one of them is if you have the financial means. So how important do you think it was for your decision to know that you're going to be financially fine, also including the equity vesting? I actually did the same thing in my last job. I had a 1-year cliff and I left before my equity vested. And I had a conversation with a friend because I was going back and forth between my mind and my heart, actually. And I was defining the problem in that way. And I was like, well, my mind's telling me you're a principal at a venture fund, you have a great job, you're deploying capital. In theory, on paper, it looks great. You're building out a network, you're getting a good salary, benefits, you have equity coming your way. My heart was telling me this isn't the right team for me to be doing this sort of work with, even if I find the work to be interesting. And even if I know that it will be really challenging for me to find that same type of role elsewhere because my background is unconventional. And I was speaking to a friend about it the night before I decided to leave, actually. And he's like, well, I was like, I might as well just wait for my equity to vest because that's the smart thing to do, and that's probably the right thing to do. And he's just like, how would the rest of your team feel about that, when you leave the day after? And regardless of if you like them or care about their feelings, is that the type of person that you want to be? That is just waiting around for your equity to vest and then bouncing. I was like, you know what? I mean, I was like 4 months away and I was like, you know what? You're right. And the next day I just was like, this is what I want. And I pulled the trigger on leaving. So I feel that. And I think it's awesome that you did that. Not, I'll go back to the question because there was a question in that. How important do you think it was that you were financially fine, to give up that equity and also to switch?
Yeah. I mean, I think being just completely real again, like it was important for me I had a nice outcome at Tinder, and that gave me a lot of flexibility in life and by the way, I also walked away from a lot of equity at Tinder that I was still going to earn. Mm-hmm. But again, like there's a point in life where you just have to do what's best for you, and you have to play the long game, and you have to have enough belief in yourself that that whatever is coming in 4 months or 6 months isn't going to be what defines your life, both financially and in terms of your legacy. And so I have a much bigger vision for my career than hitting a certain vesting date, even if it means giving up a certain amount of money. I just don't think when I'm 70 years old, 80 years old, like I'll have any regrets about that. Mm. And, I kind of think that if you like, there's multiple versions of this. Like if you're the first 10 employees at Uber and you have a family and you've only been there for a couple of years, maybe you do stay, and maybe there's reasons to do that. And it's hard because you're on the rocket ship, and those things for a lot of people just come once in your entire career. But yeah. I just kind of think there's more to life than playing kind of the vesting game. And yeah, I've seen a lot of people waste a lot of their best years of their careers. Just they call it resting and vesting, as I'm sure you've heard.
Well, it's so funny. It's the dude in Silicon Valley who like gets to sit up on the roof while he vests his Huli equity. I'm blanking out his name, but it's just such a hilarious character. They're like, we don't have a role for you here, but
it's hilarious. And as hilarious as that character is, like that's what happens at a lot of tech companies. And I think it just, again, like, it's no judgment. Some people view work as being a way to provide for their family and to have financial stability, and that's all awesome and real. And but like, if you have financial flexibility and you already have the means to do that, then like, what's the point in trying to always optimize for like getting more? And there's got to be a moment in life where you just say, I actually want to do what makes me happy and pursue my ambitions, rather than kind of have my life being defined by other people or vesting dates.
In that regard as well, like you connected to Lambda School, you had met a company and this I'll link to Stuart's podcast because I think you tell this story, but you met your first company on Twitter and you basically DM'd them and they told you to come to Kansas City immediately that day, which is hilarious. And you did, right? Yep. And you didn't even know whether it was Kansas City, Missouri or Kansas City, Kansas, which is awesome.
I was such an idiot, but
no, not at all. I mean, I think I only learned that like this past year. Well, one thing that I thought was cool on Stuart's show was, the way that you thought about luck. I'm curious if you could share with the listeners, what your view on luck is.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of life is based on serendipity and kind of putting yourself in the right position to be lucky. And so a lot of what I've done in my career is just, especially on Twitter, is try to live a really transparent, open life. I've found that people are attracted to that, and the more you open up about what's going on in your mind or your personal life, the more people will reach out to you and want to meet you. And so, a big part of being lucky is just putting yourself in the right rooms and the right conversations to have that luck. And so for me, going back to my first job in tech, like, I flew to South by Southwest. I slept on my friend's couch, and I didn't have tickets to anything. I didn't have any access, but I just went out and just started meeting people. And that's where I met the company I mentioned on the podcast, which was a company called Zarly, who offered me a job 2 days after the event. And so much of luck is just putting yourself out there and putting yourself in the right situations to be lucky. And so there's kind of a framework in venture capital, which is like, to be successful, you have to see the right companies, and then you have to pick the right companies, which isn't super complicated. But if you're not seeing the right opportunities because you're not putting yourself in the right rooms, or you're not being proactive about your career, there's no way you can pick the right things, because you're just not going to have visibility into what's going on in the world. So even for a company like Lambda School, like, being an investor just helped me see thousands of companies and enabled me to pick the one company that I wanted to work for. So yeah, for me, luck is it's not sitting at home and waiting for luck to happen. It's being really aggressive and really proactive to be lucky, but also knowing that when you're successful, there is such a big element of luck. And like, the Tinder story for me was one of my brother's friends who he went to college with had seen me online and sent my brother a text message asking if he could talk to me. And so, like, if you just want to like think about what was lucky, there was my brother met this person in college. The person saw me online. The person texted my brother, and then I connected with that person. But like, if any one of those events didn't happen, I wouldn't be living in Los Angeles talking to you on this podcast. And so there's so much luck that happens. I think the people who get in trouble in their careers and kind of get ahead of themselves, so the people who don't stop to actually acknowledge that luck, or string together the events that created that luck for them.
Mm.
And so people who actually think everything happened because they're smart or they're hardworking or whatever else it might be, because there is so much luck, but you actually have to stop and recognize that part of it too.
I think that it's like okay to value and recognize your self-worth. And it is a slippery slope of like, balancing humility with confidence and ego. I think gratitude is really the bridge, right? To be grateful for those serendipities, those little moments in life that happen I mean, even just being here, we're like, what recent guest that I had on this show was saying, we're on this blue orb, getting hurled through space and time by a giant flaming ball in the middle of nothingness. And for all of the little, even atomic interactions that had to happen every single moment leading up to now, for us to be having this conversation, humans are incapable of grokking that truly. And so gratitude kind of bridges that gap between saying, okay, like, yeah, I'm confident and I'm smart and I'm hardworking. There are so many people out there that are confident, smart, hardworking, assertive, put themselves in positions to get lucky, and it doesn't work out for us. So I think gratitude is the bridge. And what's crazy is on the flip side of that, you referenced, well, I'm not, I don't see myself as successful. And, I too struggle with that. I went to Wharton, like I'm 32 years old. I intentionally left the road of private equity and hedge funds and all that because it didn't interest me. And I have friends that are in it that are just crushing it, and they're super happy financially, certainly. And sometimes I find myself comparing myself to them, and I guess the point, and others that have started companies and have been really successful. And it's like, it's funny. It's like, is it easier to identify and appreciate luck when it's served you than it is when it serves someone else? In other words, like, I understand the importance of luck and how, one investment can make a fund, for example, or one job can make your career. And you might have landed there because your brother's friend, reached out to you, and yet still objectifying the other by putting them on a pedestal, like the Naval worship on Twitter as an example, who's someone that I have massive respect for, and who I probably fall into that category of like, oh, this guy's incredible. But we're all just human. It's not really a question so much as just noticing the nuance of how we can identify and appreciate that luck plays a role, but then sometimes get swept away in worshiping, other quote unquote successful people.
Yeah, I think a lot of the successful people you talk to, when you meet them, you realize how human they really are. Mm. And when you talk to them about their careers, you realize there were these little moments where things could have gone in either direction. And the people I admire the most are well aware of the fact that luck plays a huge part in their success. That said, like, they're not sitting waiting for luck to happen. Like, they are really passionate about their craft. One thing I notice about the people I admire the most is they're very pragmatic and just very consistent with their output and what they do.
Who do you admire the most?
I admire a lot of people, but I admire professionally actually my grandfather the most, who was a CEO for a long time and started a company when he had literally zero money, that he took that company public. And so he's still alive. But he went to the office every day till he was 95. And
wow.
He reads a couple newspapers every morning. He's been doing the same thing really throughout his entire life. And so I think luck was definitely a huge part of his story, but doing the work and being consistent was also a huge takeaway for me. So Yeah, I try to, as much as I can, just stay heads down, and I find that like the more I focus on just the day-to-day work, and I think this is the part of gratitude, it's like having gratitude on a daily basis or an hourly basis for everything you're able to do in your life, which is we're able to pursue and do pretty cool things relative to a lot of people in the world. We're sitting in California, trying to build technology products or media companies, and how cool is that? And so just being really grateful for that fact, and not being I guess, like you said, like being humble, but not being kind of, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but trying to be level-headed, I guess, is what I'm trying to say about everything, is how I approach things.
Yeah, I think that's what it is hard to figure out, right? Like that, because it's a balance. It's balancing both the drive and adrenaline and competitiveness that propels you forward and puts you in places for that opportunity to come, and then also the humility and gratitude and thoughtfulness that balances that, I think. A couple more questions for me. One is, you mentioned on Stuart's show that how important therapy has been in your life, and this show touches on mental health often. What kind of therapy have you experienced, and what impact has it had on your life?
Yeah, so I first went to a therapist when I was 19.
Okay.
I was getting out of a breakup with my girlfriend who I dated for 2 years, and I was basically living, not alone because I had friends, but I was living in Los Angeles for the first time. And I remember how scared I was to tell my parents that I thought I needed to see a therapist. And I remember how scared I was to tell my friends that I'd been a therapist. It felt like it was an acknowledgement of
Being crazy or having issues, or
yeah, and so that was, and it really changed my life. I did therapy for probably, it wasn't super long, maybe it was 6 months at the time, but it really, just talking to somebody really helped me. And then 24, went through another breakup, went to a therapist. Like, it's always around like these like big events, which I don't think is the right way to do therapy. I think doing therapy as if you're, they talk about mental fitness, like going to the gym more consistently, is probably the better approach. And then my wife and I, we've been really open about it, went to couples therapy before we got married, because
awesome.
we didn't know how to not get really angry at each other when we would have fights. And we found that our communication during those moments was just not where we wanted to be as a couple who was about to get married. And we went to therapy, and now we, every couple has their moments, but we're able to like figure out that like things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so even when we told a lot of our friends that we were going to therapy before we got married, and people were like, if you're already going to therapy, then why are you getting married?
Yeah, I just fundamentally disagree with that mentality. I think that I just had the founder of a company called Relish on the show. She was actually a co-founder of FanDuel. Relish is like a relationship coach in your pocket. I think that we always can improve. And there's this huge trend now in the Valley, at least on self-work, where meditation has become productized essentially. And that's cool. I mean, I think people can self-improve, but like the best tool that I've had in my life for self-growth has been relationship, because it's a mirror. And so doing that kind of self-work, but she called it us work, which I really loved, in a relationship, I think is so important, because you can always get better. There's always an opportunity to communicate better, to find your blind spots, to excavate the rough stuff that comes up. So I just fundamentally disagree with your friends on that one. And I'm glad that you did too.
Funny part was, a lot of those friends,
are divorced.
They end up, a lot of them ask us for our introductions to our therapists, and just like there's so many things in the world that were stigmatized that our generation and younger generations are just saying like this isn't that big of a deal, like going to a therapist should be normalized. And I think a lot of the labeling's changing, so you have life coaches, or you have people talk about going to life coaches. I've been to life coaches, and it's pretty similar to therapy. You don't go quite as much into your past, but you're talking through a lot of your drama, and so it's not that. I'm sure there's people who are much better versed in this, but to me, it hasn't felt much different than therapy. And so, I'm just grateful we live in a world now where there's a lot more tools to get help. I did when I was doing my deep dive, I found I think half the zip codes in America still don't have a single therapist who runs a business in their zip code.
Wow.
But you have teletherapy and online tools to help these people who are underserved in terms of access to help, which I think is really cool. And just the conversations change. Like, it's cool to take care of yourself now. It's cool to tell your friends at Sunday brunch that you found a great therapist, or you had a great conversation with your therapist. Like, these are all things that make you more progressive, and I feel like these are the things that people are becoming a lot more comfortable with in just everyday conversations. I feel like we're able to talk about literally everything now, and there's very little judgment, which is pretty cool.
I agree. I think it's great that people are trying to be a bit more self-aware. I think we could definitely use that culturally. It's nice to see that shift. So you're starting a podcast.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. My one hesitation is I think there's so many podcasts.
So many.
And so it's like, how do you create just something different? Because if it's not wildly different, like, why are you doing it in the first place? And so I'm trying to figure out what that might be for me. And I have some ideas, but I'm still kind of like figuring out what my position might be.
Yeah, I had a shift recently. I've thought about different formats and things like that, and the what and the how are definitely two important questions to ask. And it is super crowded. It's the same thing, like crypto newsletters are super crowded, and there's so much content out there to create. What shifted for me was I had a conversation with a guy named Andrew Horn, who leads men's groups, and he was talking about how to be of service. And I literally am just like, I do this show to be of service to anyone that listens. And the people that come on are interesting to me and have insights that are important to share and for people to hear. And whether there's one person listening or 200 or 10,000, it's important work, and it satisfies me. And I get to connect with really incredible people like you through this work. So that's my why. My why is I get to serve others through connecting with incredible people. And there's no greater joy for me than recording one of these episodes. So you might not have it yet, but I think it would be cool to understand why you want to start a show, and what you want to share with individuals.
Yeah. I love, what I've liked about this conversation, and is just the level of honesty. And I think for everything I do, whether it's on Twitter or on anything I write, like, just being radically honest with people is what I find draws people into what I do. And so the last thing I would want to do is do like a podcast where you interview a venture capitalist and talk about why they invested in a certain company, or kind of like, I don't know. I feel like the
invest like the best.
I'd like invest like the best. I think that's
Me
actually
too.
But I think there's a lot of podcasts that just kind of exist to put people on pedestals, and um, to me, like that content's not super interesting. I do like there's a couple like there's one called Venture Stories that Eric Thornburg runs, and I like that just because they totally nerd out about a single topic for like an hour, and it's kind of like listening to a conversation between two really smart people at lunch. You just kind of get to be a fly on the wall. So I think those are interesting. I've also thought about like things that are kind of like semi-scripted, where it's. Did you ever listen to the first startup, the Gimlet startup podcast?
No.
It was like them going around talking about what it was like to build a company, but they would record like conversations that were very personal. So it's like co-founders talking about how they're going to split equity, and there's a microphone in the room, so it's like radical transparency about these really critical moments for them starting a company. So I think there's one play on podcasts is just like giving people access that they've never had before, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, and you have an incredible network of individuals that you could access and offer to, to folks as well.
Yeah, so I'm still figuring it out, but I think podcasts are such a interesting format because I think, to your point about kind of like consumer habits, it allows people to kind of multitask. So it's not, I'll probably listen to this while I'm at the gym or in my car or
cooking
or walking my dog. Whereas, and that feels additive to me, where something that forces you to stare at your phone all day maybe isn't quite as additive, or it doesn't complement your healthy activities.
Yeah, and I mean, I've thought about different formats and things, like some people don't like to listen for an hour and 20 minutes, which is how long we've gone right now. And what if I just did, sound bites or 15-minute episode with rapid fire questions, or 20? And, for me, it's often about the connection with the guest. And so what I find is like, sometimes short episodes are great. Sometimes we go 30, 40 minutes. It's like, that was enough. But oftentimes the best stuff happens right in the middle. And it takes just a little bit of warming up. Like I've thought about, what if I just started with just start with a question. In this episode, for example, I decided up front that I didn't want to ask you to give me your background, because sometimes it gets a little bit, draggy, and it's like, there are important points I want to hit upon. So anyways, it's, this is like I said, like the 35th or 6th episode that I've recorded. I'm constantly learning. It's really fun. I highly recommend it. I think everyone should start a podcast, if only to just, have great conversations and really focused, intentional conversations present with guests. But yeah, this has been great, Jeff. Thank you so much for your time. I know that you're a busy guy, so I appreciate you giving me and the listeners, an hour and a half. I will link out to, your website, your Twitter account. Is there anything else that you want to say to the listeners before you bounce?
No, just feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at JMJ, so it's pretty easy to find me. And hopefully this was helpful and additive to your life. So thank you for having me.
Respect. All right. Hello, Lookup listeners. One final note before we go. Thank you again for tuning in. Going forward, we'll be releasing new episodes of Lookup every Wednesday morning, Eastern Time. If you're getting value from this podcast and you want to give back to support our future, please take a moment to contribute to our community on Patreon. Our Patreon contributors have access to some great additional perks, including one-on-one meditations with yours truly. I've shared the link in the show notes below the episode. You can also find the show notes to this and previous episodes on our website, www.thelookuppodcast.com. If you can't contribute at this time, there are other helpful ways to give back. You can share this episode on social media, tag me, and or leave a review on your favorite podcast app. Trust me, every review goes a long way. If you want more content, including more of my personal thoughts, you can follow me on social media. My handle on both Instagram and Twitter is @WarkMeinstein, WarkMeinstein, or you can subscribe to the Lookup Weekly newsletter on my website. I'm also very responsive to email, so feel free to send questions, booking inquiries, speaking requests, and sponsorship opportunities to marc@thelookuppodcast.com. Finally, for those of you that don't know, I lead virtual yoga, breathwork, and meditation classes, as well as one-on-one coaching and teaching sessions, which you can book from the website or my social media accounts. Thank you to Sam Palumbo and Patch Kid Music for the great intro and outro tunes and for the sound engineering. Thank you, brother. And thank you to all of you listeners for continuing to support the show, for tuning in. And I hope that you've been enjoying this journey as much as I have.